Everyone thought my grandfather was just another quiet old man on a porch. That's what made him dangerous. It was the 6th morning of his visit. A warm beam of sunlight stretched across my small porch in Sunset Grove, and Grandpa Tom sat there, in his worn sneakers, a faded jacket, and an old wristwatch that ticked just a little too loudly. He had a newspaper folded neatly in his lap, the edges smoothed like he was filing away evidence. I thought it was just one of his little habits, from retirement. I didn't know the truth yet. From the street, Samantha Harrison spotted him for the first time. HOA president, self-proclaimed defender of community standards, and, though I wouldn't learn this until later, a predator wrapped in designer blazers. Her eyes locked on Grandpa like she'd just found a mark in a con game. She was 49, sharp in a way that cut too deep, and carried herself like every inch of the neighborhood was hers to control. She walked toward us with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Alex, honey," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "HOA policy requires visitors over 14 days to register. It's just $500. Protects everyone's property values." I almost laughed. Grandpa was here for 3 weeks. To relax. $500 just to sit on my porch? I expected her to drop it once she saw the absurdity. Instead, her eyes flicked to his old watch, then back to his face, and something cold slid into her tone. "I'm sure someone on a fixed income understands the importance of contributing to community standards," she said. I felt heat rush to my face. This was my grandfather, not some random tenant she could push around. But she kept going, like she could smell any weakness in the air. "Rules apply to everyone," she added, "even family." Grandpa looked up from his paper and met her gaze. His voice was calm, almost too calm. "Interesting policy. What legal authority requires family visitor registration?" Her smile tightened. "HOA bylaws, sir. I know legal documents can be challenging at your age, but don't worry. We keep it very simple for our senior community members." The condescension was thick enough to choke on. I glanced at Grandpa, expecting him to brush it off. But there was a sharpness in his eyes now, a subtle shift I didn't recognize. I should have asked him then why his expression had changed. I should have paid attention. 2 days later, she was back. This time, she wasn't asking. She was demanding. She slapped a thick packet of papers onto our porch table. "The fee is now $500 plus $25 daily penalties for non-compliance." Her gaze dropped to his jacket like it didn't belong in her perfect neighborhood. "Now, I know this might seem like a lot on Social Security," she said, "but we do accept payment plans for people in your situation." Grandpa flipped through the pages with deliberate care, asking about documents that weren't attached. Samantha waved him off like he was a child asking too many questions. "Sweetie, you don't need to worry about all the complicated legal details. Just sign here." She even softened her voice, like she was doing him a favor. "I understand. Reading fine print can be overwhelming when your best years are behind you." That night I snapped at him for the first time. "Why can't you just follow the rules? You're visiting my home." He set his paper down and looked at me, not angry but with a firmness I'd never seen before. "Paying won't make this—" "Go away, sweetheart. It'll make it worse." "How do you know?" I demanded. His reply was quiet, but it carried weight. "Because bullies don't stop when you give them what they want. They escalate." I thought he was just being stubborn. I didn't realize yet that he was speaking from decades of experience. By day 11, she had him pegged as non-compliant. She showed up with a total bill of $650 and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "This might strain the budget of someone living on government assistance," she said, "but rules are rules." When he asked about the legal team she kept referencing, she dropped the pretense and let the edge in her voice show. "That's not how this works, dear." Then she leaned in slightly. "We can't have just anyone thinking they can ignore the rules that maintain property values for homeowners who actually contribute to society." It was the first time I felt real fear. Not the kind you can rationalize away, but the kind that sits heavy in your stomach. Day 13, the threat became open. Samantha arrived with her final total, $750. Payment due by 6 p.m. tomorrow, she said, or we proceed with enforcement action. I asked what kind of enforcement she meant. She glanced at our little home, at Grandpa's clothes, and said coldly, "Community protection protocols. Some people need stronger encouragement to understand their place in a respectable neighborhood." That night, I heard her on the phone just outside my house. "Need additional resources for compliance issue," she said. "Elderly man, possibly government background, but acting beyond his means. If he won't pay voluntarily, we move to the enforcement phase," I told Grandpa immediately. He didn't panic. In fact, he smiled grimly. "Good. Now we know she's not working alone." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This woman was planning something dangerous, and my grandfather thought that was good. "Knowledge is power, sweetheart," he said simply. The next day, a black sedan with tinted windows parked across the street. Grandpa's eyes narrowed the second he saw it. "Wrong car for a resident," he murmured. "Wrong clothes for a casual meeting. Wrong body language for a friendly conversation. That's a business meeting and not a legal one." By the time the sun set, I had the sinking feeling he was right. Because that night, 4 men in military-style gear stepped out of those vehicles, weapons in hand, lights flashing, voices booming through a bullhorn. "Police! Thomas Sterling! Exit the premises immediately for questioning!" I froze in the doorway, heart pounding so hard it hurt. Neighbors gathered on their porches, phones up, recording what they thought was a SWAT raid. Grandpa didn't move. He just studied them, his voice low and calm. "Watch their equipment and movements," he told me. "They have guns," I hissed. "We need to hide." He didn't look at me. "Their rifles have orange tips painted black. Those are fake guns, sweetheart." I stared at him, confused and terrified. How could he possibly know that? Outside, Samantha stood next to a man from the black sedan. Her arms crossed, her expression smug. And that's when I realized whatever was about to happen, Grandpa wasn't afraid. The fake cops moved with a precision that made my skin crawl. It wasn't random, it was practiced, coordinated. They took positions at the corners of our yard, rifles angled, eyes scanning. It looked like a scene from a police drama, except the more I watched, the more it felt wrong. Grandpa stood there like he had all the time in the world, hands in plain view. "They're not real law enforcement," he murmured again, like he was pointing out a bird in the yard instead of 4 armed men on our property. Meanwhile, Samantha was eating this up. She was shouting loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "See, Mr. Sterling? This is what happens when certain types refuse to cooperate. Certain types." I knew exactly what she meant. The man beside her, the one from the sedan, didn't look so convinced. His eyes flicked toward Grandpa, studying him. "That man doesn't look scared," he muttered to her. "Something's wrong." She ignored him. She was in her element, finally getting the public spectacle she'd been building toward. The leader of the fake SWAT team stepped forward, bullhorn still in hand. "Thomas Sterling, step outside slowly with your hands up." Grandpa didn't move right away. Instead, he asked me quietly, "Remember what I told you about reading behavior?" I nodded shakily. "Good. Watch his eyes, not the gun." He opened the front door and stepped out, slow and deliberate. The fake cop approached, trying to project authority. "Not your concern, old man. Just answer our questions." Grandpa tilted, his head like he'd just spotted a flaw in a puzzle. "Which department did you say you're with?" The man hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. Grandpa caught it instantly. "Department ID number?" he pressed. "Commission card? Peace officer certification?" The leader's jaw tightened. "That's classified." I could see it now, the shift in their posture, the little glances between them, the sweat starting to bead under their heavy gear. Whoever they'd expected Grandpa to be, it wasn't this. I felt something change inside me, too. I wasn't just a terrified bystander anymore. My eyes swept over their vehicles, plain black, no markings. "Why aren't your cars labeled with department logos?" I blurted out before I could stop myself. Grandpa glanced sideways at me and smiled, just a little. "Excellent observation, sweetheart." The leader's hand twitched, like he was reconsidering the whole operation. But Samantha was losing control of the moment, and she didn't like it. She shouted from the sidewalk, "Just arrest him! Do your job!" That was when she snapped completely. "I will not have transients making our property values drop!" she screamed. It was like her mask had been ripped off. Grandpa didn't even flinch. He just said, "Calm as you please. Thank you, Mrs. Harrison. That was very helpful for everyone to hear." And then, in the distance, the sound that would change. Everything. Sirens. Not the showy, wailing kind these guys had used when they pulled up. This was steady, professional, a low hum of efficiency. 3 unmarked SUVs rounded the corner, federal plates glinting under the streetlights. The kind of vehicles that didn't need decals to prove who they were. Doors opened, and real federal. Agents stepped out. No theatrics, no bullhorns. Just clean, precise movements that told you immediately these were the real thing. "FBI," one of them called out. "Everyone lower your weapons immediately." The fake SWAT team froze. One of them stammered, "Oh no, those are actual federal agents." Within seconds, they were disarmed, hands in the air, their entire act crumbling, under the weight of the real thing. Samantha's smug expression shattered like glass. I was still trying to process it all when I turned to Grandpa and asked, "How did they get here so fast? And how do they know you?" He looked at me with a mix of love and something heavier. Regret. "Because I called them an hour ago, sweetheart." The ground shifted under my feet. You called the FBI?" "Yes," he said simply. "Because I used to work for them." The words hit harder than the sirens had. My mind reeled. 30 years? I thought he'd been just a quiet, retired accountant. Instead, he'd been a federal agent specializing in financial crimes, the exact kind Samantha was running. I glanced back at her, and the shock on her face told me she'd just realized it too. "But you look so ordinary," she said weakly. Grandpa's eyes didn't waver. 30 years with the FBI, Mrs. Harrison. The most dangerous people often look the most harmless." Before anyone could say another word, the man from the sedan made his move. He stepped forward, gun suddenly in hand, and grabbed Samantha by the arm, yanking her toward him like a human shield. This wasn't theater anymore. The FBI agents shifted, instantly hands tightening on their weapons. Grandpa's voice cut through the chaos, steady as stone. "Vincent Torres, age 45, money laundering specialist, 2 prior arrests in Nevada and Arizona." Torres flinched, eyes darting to him. "How do you—" "Your boss was arrested this morning," Grandpa said, his voice unshakable. "Your network is finished. You are completely alone." Torres checked his phone, desperate for backup. No calls, no messages. The silence told him the truth before his pride would. Slowly, he lowered his weapon. The agents moved in. Torres was cuffed. Samantha was led away. The fake SWAT team sat on the curb, their armor looking cheap under the floodlights. I stood there, heart still pounding, trying to process what had just happened. "Grandpa." My voice was small. "You dismantled all of this, just like that." He gave a faint smile. "Not just like that, sweetheart. With patience, with knowledge, and with the right people in place before the storm hits." I thought that was the end of it. I didn't know the storm had only begun. I woke up the next morning thinking we'd won. The HOA nightmare was over. Samantha was in custody. The fake cops were exposed. The man from the sedan, Vincent Torres, was facing federal charges. I thought the worst was behind us. I couldn't have been more wrong. A black SUV pulled up outside, and a tall man in a dark suit stepped out carrying a heavy file. He knocked on our door like someone who'd knocked on 100 doors before, and when Grandpa opened it, his face lit up. "Dave," Grandpa said warmly. "It's been too long." Dave Martin, retired FBI, just like Grandpa, but still working high-level cases. And the way he carried that file told me this wasn't a social visit. We sat at the kitchen table, the blinds drawn, as he laid out what he'd brought. "What you uncovered here," he said, "isn't just an HOA scam. This is a coordinated network operating across 4 communities in 3 states. He slid photos across the table. Photos of people I didn't recognize, bank, transfers, property records. They've stolen $2.3 million over the last 3 years. Most victims are elderly, fixed incomes, vulnerable. I stared at the number. $2,300,000. My stomach turned. These weren't just scams. They were life savings, retirement plans, homes, entire futures drained away. And Samantha? I asked. Dave's expression hardened. Recruit, brought in by Torres at an HOA conference. He gave her the playbook, fake fees, legal intimidation. She kept 70%, sent 30 to the regional fund. Grandpa nodded like this confirmed something he'd suspected. "She's not a leader," he said quietly. "She's a tool. The real power is higher up." Dave's eyes flicked to me. "We've got her confession on record." He opened a laptop, and I watched footage from an interview room. Samantha sat slouched in a chair, her confidence gone. She spoke mechanically, almost like she was reading a script about how Vincent had groomed her into the operation, when she said, "I thought I was building a successful business. I thought I was outsmarting everyone." My chest tightened. Outsmarting everyone? By stealing from people's grandparents. That night, Grandpa and I sat on the porch, the street quiet except for the distant hum of traffic. I finally asked him, the question that had been burning since yesterday, "How could you stay so calm when those men showed up?" He took a long breath. "Because I didn't have complete control until violence became possible. Until then, we were on our own." I thought back to the way he'd let Samantha talk, let her escalate, let her dig her own hole deeper and deeper. It hadn't been inaction, it had been strategy. Then he told me something I'd never heard before. In 1975, my great-grandfather had lost his life savings to a financial scammer. "I watched him age 10 years and 6 months, Grandpa said. "It broke him. I decided criminals like that wouldn't destroy families on my watch." It explained everything, why he couldn't just walk away. The following weeks were a whirlwind. We had an emergency HOA meeting where Samantha resigned in disgrace, and a kind, no-nonsense neighbor named Mrs. Patterson was elected interim president. Every fake fee was refunded. $47,000 came back to our community alone. Grandpa's advice at that meeting was simple. Trust but verify. Always ask for specific legal authority. Real laws have real sources. 6 months later, justice came down hard. Samantha, 8 years in federal prison plus $2.3 million restitution. Torres, 12 years for organized crime and asset forfeiture. The fake SWAT leader, 2 years probation, banned from security work forever. The company dissolved. All $2.3 million was recovered and returned to 67 victims. But in the middle of our celebration, I caught Grandpa late one night at the dining table, a stack of documents spread out in front of him. Not just any documents, files stamped classified in bold red letters. His expression was darker than I'd ever seen it. I caught pieces of text as he turned the pages. Elder abuse ring. Phoenix. Suspicious deaths. Nevada. Victims missing after refusal to pay. "This wasn't just fraud, Alex," he said without looking up. "This was systematic predation." The phone rang. It was Dave. His voice was tight. Tom, we found something. In Torres's files. Something worse than we told the public. By the time the call ended, I understood why Grandpa hadn't told me everything. The network wasn't just stealing money. They were identifying the most vulnerable elderly people. For other purposes. People in other states had disappeared after resisting payment. Grandpa had known from the start. Every calm word, every patient move. It hadn't just been experience. It had been protective love. He'd kept me in the dark because the full truth was too ugly to carry. But the truth has a way of breaking through. 2 weeks later, we were sitting at the kitchen table when his phone buzzed with a secure message. His eyes scanned it, and I saw the blood drain from his face. Network retaliation protocols activated. Family members of investigating agents are now priority targets. He didn't tell me right away. I only found out when he sat me down that night and explained what it meant. They have insurance policies against interference, he said. They make sure every agent knows. If you go after them, your family pays the price. Cold dread settled in my stomach. So what do? He didn't hesitate. We prepare, and we use every skill I learned in 30 years of federal service. Over the next week, our quiet home became something out of a security manual. Cameras at every angle, reinforced doors, reinforced windows, go bags packed and hidden, code words. Escape routes practiced until I could navigate them blindfolded. It was terrifying and strangely comforting. The first signs of surveillance came exactly 2 weeks later. A silver sedan parked on the street in the morning and again in the afternoon, different spots each time. A delivery driver who never delivered anything. Phone calls that hung up the second we answered. My internet searches, monitored. When I confirmed it, Grandpa just nodded. Good. That means they're still in reconnaissance. Gives us time to prepare countermeasures. I swallowed hard. What kind of countermeasures? His eyes were steady. Time to teach. Use some things they don't cover in software development. And that's when my training began. It started with awareness. Don't just look, Grandpa told me. See? We walked the neighborhood not like two people enjoying a stroll, but like hunters tracing every sound, every shadow. He pointed out the things I'd never noticed. Before, the car parked facing the wrong direction, the curtain that twitched when we passed, the faint smell of cigarette smoke where no one had been standing. At first, it was overwhelming. My brain wanted to file it all under paranoia. But the more I paid attention, the more I realized these things didn't happen by accident. At home, the training expanded. We mapped escape routes through every room in the house until I could move through them without thinking. We practiced, coded phrases that sounded like everyday conversation, but would trigger emergency protocols if spoken in the wrong place. I learned how to send a secure message using only my phone's flashlight in Morse code. He didn't just teach me to protect myself. He taught me to think like an investigator. How do you spot danger? He asked one night over coffee. I gave the obvious answer. When someone's acting suspicious, he shook his head. No, danger hides in the familiar. If you only notice the obvious, you're already too late. That week, the harassment started. It was subtle at first. An email to my boss claiming I was involved in federal investigations and posed a security risk to the company. My credit report suddenly showed inquiries I hadn't made. Fake social media accounts appeared, spreading rumors about me. The phone rang at all hours with anonymous calls. More than once, police knocked on the door for wellness checks after someone reported suspicious activity at our address. It was Samantha's tactics, but sharper, more calculated. When I vented my frustration, Grandpa's answer was simple. This is smarter than physical violence, harder to trace, more damaging long-term. That's why they use it. Then came the breakthrough. I traced one of the harassment campaigns back to a series of burner accounts. From there, I followed digital breadcrumbs, IP addresses bouncing through proxies, accounts tied to temporary email services. It took me 3 nights, But eventually, I hit the source. The same shell companies Vincent Torres had used for his HOA fraud network. I spun my chair toward Grandpa. They're using the exact same infrastructure. He didn't even look surprised. Criminals rarely abandon a working method, and that's exactly how we catch them. That was the moment the tone shifted. We weren't just defending ourselves anymore. We were hunting. Agent Martin came into the loop, and suddenly we had federal resources quietly feeding us intel. Grandpa and I sat across from each other at the kitchen table, laptops open, coffee mugs steaming. It felt less like a home and more like a command center. Then Grandpa dropped the plan. We use you as bait. I froze. What? In controlled conditions, he clarified. You keep your routine. We make them think you're vulnerable. I'll be nearby with backup you can't see. At first, all I could feel was the fear, the idea of deliberately drawing them closer. But the fear was quickly replaced by something else. Anger. I was tired of the car parked outside, tired of the fake accounts, tired of feeling like every shadow might be a threat. All right, I said. But if we're doing this, we're doing it my way too. Smart bait. The setup was meticulous. Grandpa staged his departure for a consulting job, complete with a visible suitcase and a casual goodbye in the driveway. In reality, he was in an unmarked van 2 streets over, FBI surveillance woven into the neighborhood like invisible thread. I went about my normal day, making sure they could see I was alone. Grocery store, coffee shop, evening walk. It didn't take long. 3 days in, I was pushing a cart through the frozen foods aisle when 2 men flanked me. Clean-cut, polite voices, but their eyes were hard. "You're Alex Sterling?" one asked. I kept my tone even. "Who's asking?" The taller one smiled without warmth. "Your grandfather cost our organization significant money. Time to pay it back." I tilted my head. "What organization is that?" He answered without thinking. The slip we'd been waiting for. "Same one that employed Vincent Torres and Samantha Harrison." Every word was recorded by the tiny mic clipped to my jacket. I left the store calmly, heart pounding, while an FBI tail followed them to a modest-looking office building on the edge of town. Within the hour, a full raid was underway. Inside, they found servers loaded with financial records, communications, and connections to other HOA fraud operations across multiple states. When the dust settled, the count was staggering: 12. Communities freed from active fraud, $8.2 million recovered, 23 arrests across 6 states. That night, we sat at the kitchen table, takeout containers spread between us. I looked at Grandpa and said, "We really made a difference, didn't we?" He smiled, the kind of smile that holds years of weight behind it. "We saved families, sweetheart. That's the only metric that matters." I thought maybe, just maybe, that was the end of it. But then his phone buzzed with an encrypted alert. I watched his expression change. Priority alert. "Maple Heights' target is Vincent Torres' sister. She knows you're coming." He looked up at me, calm as always. "Our next case isn't going to be routine," and I realized we'd just walked into a fight with someone who had already been preparing for war. Maria Torres Valdez didn't look like her brother, and that made her more dangerous. When Agent Martin arrived the next morning, he laid a slim black case file on our kitchen table. "Vincent's younger sister," he said. "Been running HOA. Fraud for 2 years with military precision." I leaned over the folder. Maria stared back at me from a glossy photo, dark hair pulled into a tight bun, eyes sharp enough to cut through lies. 45 years old, law degree, a record so clean it sparkled. "What makes her different from Samantha?" I asked. Martin's voice was flat. "She's learned from their mistakes. No theatrics, no fake SWAT teams, nothing obvious that would attract attention. She's prepared for federal interference, specifically yours." Grandpa raised an eyebrow. "Studying our methods?" Martin nodded. "And planning around them." The case file was like a blueprint of control. Maria's digital footprint was a fortress, encrypted communications, shell companies stacked like Russian nesting dolls, offshore accounts with ownership trails designed to disappear into legal fog. "This isn't amateur hour," I said, flipping through pages of transaction chains. "She's running this like a tech startup." Grandpa gave me a proud smile. "Now you're thinking like an investigator." We didn't just plan an investigation. We planned an infiltration. The cover was simple. I'd pose as a young professional, looking for my first home in Maple Heights. Grandpa would play the concerned grandfather, helping me navigate the process. We'd present ourselves as financially comfortable, but naive, exactly the type Maria liked to bleed slowly. Our first meeting was in the HOA's Immaculate Community Center. Maria greeted us with a polished smile and a handshake that felt like she'd already calculated my pulse. "Miss Sterling, welcome to Maple Heights," she said smoothly. "I hear your grandfather is assisting you?" "That's right," I replied, smiling just enough. "He's helping me understand HOA requirements." Her gaze flicked to him, then back to me. The politeness never wavered, but there was an alertness there, like she'd already started the mental checklist of how to get under our skin. Unlike Samantha, Maria didn't insult or threaten. She presented every rule, every fee, as a professional service. She slid an enhanced security package brochure toward me. $800 annually, legal representation for disputes, enhanced community monitoring, priority emergency response. Grandpa frowned just enough to sell the act. "That's a lot for someone starting out." Maria's tone softened, but her words were deliberate. "Experience teaches us that cutting corners on security proves costly long-term." It was subtle, a seed planted, fear disguised as advice. While Grandpa kept her engaged in conversation, I quietly mapped her digital systems from my phone. Encrypted communications bounced through international servers. Shell company ownership structures crossed multiple jurisdictions. There was a level of sophistication here that would take traditional investigators months to untangle. "She's running this like a coordinated military operation," I told Grandpa later, "and she's smart enough to have escape plans." He nodded. Then we use her professionalism against her. The opening move came at a community meeting. I accidentally let slip that my grandfather used to work for the government. He played his part perfectly, acting cautious, even a little uncomfortable, about drawing federal attention. Maria's gaze sharpened. "And what department was that?" "Oh, just boring financial stuff," he said with a shrug. "It was bait, and she took it." Her background check on him was fast and professional. Within days, she'd uncovered his FBI history. When I monitored her searches in real time, I told him, "She found your record." His response was instant. "Good. Now she'll make her move." But Maria didn't send actors in fake uniforms or make late-night threats. She approached him directly, calm, professional, eyes level. "Mr. Sterling," she said, "I believe we should have an honest conversation about why a retired FBI agent is suddenly interested in my community." Grandpa didn't flinch. "Looks like you've done your homework." "I've learned from family mistakes," she said evenly. "Direct confrontation, professional resolution." Her offer was surprisingly smooth. He could complete his home evaluation without interference, and she would adjust her community programs to ensure federal compliance. While the two of them discussed terms, I was in my own war. Inside, her network, pulling every financial record I could get my hands on. Blockchain transactions, offshore transfers, victim lists, escalation schedules. By the time the conversation was over, I had everything. Full exposure of her operation across multiple states. I sent the secure message to Agent Martin, full network structure. All victims identified. Offshore accounts mapped. Ready. When the warrants hit, Maria didn't scream or fight. She simply nodded to the agents, cuffing her wrists, and said, "Impressive work, Agent Sterling, both of you. I thanked her for the compliment. We learned from the best teachers, Grandpa added without missing a beat, including your brother's mistakes. As the convoy of police vehicles rolled away with her in the back seat, I let myself believe for just a moment that maybe this was the final chapter. But then Grandpa's phone rang, an unknown international number, a voice, cold and precise. Agent Sterling, you've disrupted significant financial operations. This requires correction. The line went dead. When Agent Martin traced the call, the location made my stomach tighten. The Cayman Islands Financial District. They're not sending threats, Martin said. They're sending professionals. Grandpa leaned back, eyes steady. Looks like our neighborhood justice project just went worldwide. The moment Agent Martin said international, the air in the room changed. HOA fraud was one thing. Global operations. That was another war entirely. Within 48 hours, federal marshals arrived at our door. They didn't ask. They escorted. Bulletproof. SUVs. Neutral expressions. The kind of presence that tells you you're not just being protected. You're being contained. The safe house wasn't what I expected. It wasn't a cabin in the woods or a concrete bunker. It was an ordinary suburban home. The kind that could disappear in plain sight. Cameras were hidden in door frames. Motion sensors watched every shadow. How long do we stay here? I asked. Grandpa's answer was calm, almost casual. Until we turned the hunters into the hunted, sweetheart. And so began the crash course in international crime. Every morning I'd find him at the dining table, coffee steaming, reviewing encrypted case files with a focus so sharp it cut through the quiet. At first I just skimmed. Then I started reading. The numbers didn't seem real. $127 million, 47 countries, thousands of elderly victims, targeted with surgical precision. The patterns were chilling. This wasn't chaos. It was business. HOA-style fraud as an export model. Local coordinators recruited at neighborhood conferences. Fees disguised as legal compliance. Shell companies that laundered money through legitimate financial institutions before moving it offshore. These aren't thugs, I told him. This is corporate-level crime. They've industrialized elder exploitation. His nod was small, but I caught the pride in it. Now you see why we don't walk away. The FBI task force meetings were unlike anything I'd ever seen. Dozens of agents, Interpol connections, calls with European financial investigators, screens mapping money trails across continents like veins on a global map. My role wasn't passive anymore. My technical skills became the skeleton key to systems they'd spent years trying to crack. I traced cryptocurrency flows through layered wallets, found hidden communication channels buried inside seemingly innocent photo metadata, linked victim lists across countries by cross-referencing local property records and social media data scraping. You're not just in this, Agent, Martin said one night. You're leading the digital arm of the investigation. The deeper we dug, the more the network started to react. Encrypted messages hinted at complications in the Sterling situation. Surveillance attempts ramped up, unmarked cars lingering too long outside the safe house. Intercepted chatter about applying pressure through third parties. But we were ready. Grandpa's strategy was as bold as it was dangerous. Make them believe we were running so they'd step into the open. We created false digital trails, suggesting we were fleeing the country. Hotel bookings in Miami, ferry reservations to the Bahamas, even staged social media posts with blurred palm trees in the background. Every move was monitored by FBI cyber units. Every bite of bait designed to lead them into prearranged traps. This feels like we're setting up a movie sting, I said. It is, Grandpa replied without looking up from his notes. Only difference is, there's no retake if we get it wrong. The plan unfolded in layers. First, we made them think they'd found us in a safe house location in Tampa. That site was already wired for surveillance. When their advance team showed up, they were recorded discussing network protocols and local contacts. Then we let them intercept a communications drop. containing just enough genuine data to hook them, and a tracker that traced back to their central coordination servers in Singapore. From there, the case exploded. Simultaneous raids were coordinated across 12 countries. FBI agents in D.C., Europol in The Hague, the Australian Federal Police in Sydney, all working off the digital backbone we'd built. The results were staggering. 247 arrests, $127 million recovered and returned to victims, entire regional leadership structures dismantled. It wasn't just an operation. It was the largest elder fraud takedown in FBI history. When the dust settled, the director himself flew out to the safe house. The commendation ceremony was small, no press, no cameras, but the weight of it was real. Standing next to Grandpa, hearing them call me Agent Sterling for the first time, I felt a pride so deep it made my throat ache. Back in Sunset Grove, the impact was already rippling. Mrs. Patterson established the Sterling Community Protection Program, monthly fraud prevention workshops, a direct FBI hotline for suspicious HOA activities. Our neighborhood wasn't just safe, it was prepared. Grandpa and I founded Sterling and Associates, a family-run consulting firm that specialized in protecting elderly families from financial crime. We trained local police, advised prosecutors, even testified before congressional committees on elder exploitation prevention. It felt like we'd climbed a mountain. And then, just when I thought we might finally have some peace, a message lit up Grandpa's phone. Priority alert. Maple Heights' target is Vincent Torres's sister. She knows you're coming. I looked at him. Another Torres? His expression was calm, too calm. Nothing's wrong, he said, sliding the phone back into his pocket. Everything's perfect. How is that perfect? I asked. Because this time, he said with a faint smile, they know exactly who they're dealing with. Walking into Maple Heights felt different from any community we'd investigated before. Not because of the houses. They were the same manicured lawns and perfect driveways we'd seen 100 times. But because of the way the air seemed alert. They were expecting us. From the moment we crossed the welcome sign, I spotted the first surveillance point. A gardener who spent too long trimming one hedge. A jogger who passed us twice in 5 minutes without breaking a sweat. They're testing response time, Grandpa murmured. We weren't undercover this time. Our names were known. Our faces were recognized. And Maria Torres Valdez, Vincent's sister, was already playing chess 3 moves ahead. The HOA meeting was our first opportunity to see her in action. The room was all polished wood tables, bottled water, and quiet authority. Maria sat at the head like a judge presiding over her court. Agent Sterling, she greeted Grandpa with the faintest of smiles. And Agent Sterling, Jr., I presume. Her tone was cordial, but the subtext was clear. I know exactly who you are, and I am not intimidated. We're here to observe, Grandpa replied smoothly. Nothing more. She arched an eyebrow. Observation can be misleading, without context. I watched the way she worked the room, never raising. Her voice never breaking eye contact, never giving an inch. She wasn't Samantha, throwing tantrums when challenged. Maria was precise. She wielded influence like a scalpel. Her operation was even more sophisticated than the file suggested. Legal compliance forms that blended genuine statutes with her. Own fabricated clauses. Fee schedules that escalated in such small increments victims barely noticed until they were drowning. And unlike her brother, she never relied on muscle. She had attorneys, accountants, and lobbyists in her pocket. This is going to be harder than anything we've done, I told Grandpa that night, which means we're going to make it look easy, he said, eyes glinting. The strategy was dangerous. Let her believe she was closing in on us while we quietly dismantled her network from the inside. We played our roles, me as the eager young buyer considering a property in her jurisdiction, Grandpa as the protective but increasingly concerned family member. Every interaction was recorded, every document photographed. At the same time, my laptop became our second battlefield. I breached her encrypted comms through a flaw in her contractor portal, an oversight she never imagined anyone would think to exploit. From there, I traced financial flows through layered blockchain transactions, eventually hitting a pattern that made my stomach tighten. She wasn't just running her own operation. She was coordinating with 3 other HOA presidents in different states, and those presidents were linked to names we'd seen in the Cayman Islands files. When I showed Grandpa, his jaw tightened. This isn't just her running a regional network. She's managing the handoff between local fraud and international laundering. It was worse than that. The files included a victim list sorted by liquidation potential, a euphemism I recognized from the classified documents we'd seen months ago. Some of those names had already been crossed out. I didn't want to ask what that meant. The turning point came when Maria invited us to a private consultation in her office. She poured coffee, smiled politely, and cut straight to the point. "I know you're here to investigate me," she said, "and I know you think you found a weak point. But here's my offer. You walk away, and I'll ensure none of your other cases are disrupted." It wasn't a threat, not exactly. It was a business negotiation. Grandpa leaned forward slightly. "The problem with that offer, Maria, is that you're assuming we want to walk away." Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't flinch. "Then you're assuming I'm afraid of prosecution." "You should be," I said quietly. For the first time, her gaze shifted to me fully. "And why is that?" "Because while we've been sitting here," I told her, "your offshore accounts have been cloned, your contractor portal has been breached, and every transaction you've ever processed is sitting on a secure FBI server." Her composure cracked. Just a hair. "Impressive," she said finally. "You're better than I thought." The trap was already closing. Outside, FBI agents in plain clothes had been shadowing her staff for days. Inside, my breach had triggered. An auto-download of her network's shared drives the moment she logged in to show us something. What we didn't expect was her counter. As agents moved in later that evening to secure her servers, a separate FBI field office reported that one of our safe house locations had been compromised, its hard drives wiped, physical files stolen. "Diversion," Grandpa said instantly. "She planned for this. But it was too late for her. Even without the stolen files, we had enough to dismantle her operation. The arrests came at dawn. Maria, her legal team, and the 3 HOA presidents linked to her network. As she was led past us, she paused just long enough to say, "This isn't over. You've made enemies you haven't even met yet." And then she was gone. I thought it was bluster. Until 2 days later, an encrypted call came through from a number Martin recognized instantly. Cayman Islands. The voice was smooth, male, and utterly calm. "Agent Sterling, you've just disrupted significant financial operations. This requires correction." The line went dead. Grandpa looked at me across the table. "We've been climbing the ladder," he said. "And I think we've just reached the top." The Cayman Islands call wasn't just a threat. It was an invitation. We weren't dealing with a local fraud ring anymore. We'd climbed past the regionals, past the multi-state coordinators, past Maria's careful corporate layers. We were looking at the architects, the ones who'd turned elder exploitation into a global business model. "They're not just calling to scare us," Agent Martin said during the emergency briefing. "They're signaling that you're on their radar, meaning they're also tracking your movements." "Good," Grandpa said simply. "Makes it easier to feed them the wrong ones." The plan we built over the next 3 weeks was the most ambitious of our careers. This time, there would be no sting in a grocery store aisle, no HOA meeting takedown. This was going to be an international chess match, played in boardrooms, on encrypted networks, and in offshore banks. My role was clear. Build the digital, maze that would lead them exactly where we wanted them to go. I set up false shell companies, offshore accounts with just enough movement to look real, and communications that hinted at insider vulnerabilities. Every click, every login, every transaction was being monitored in real time by the task force. Grandpa's role was quieter but just as critical. Using his behavioral analysis skills, he mapped out how the organization would respond at each stage. Who would move first? Who would hold back? Who would try to buy time? They'll come for the bait in layers, he predicted. Middle managers. First, the big players never touch anything directly until they're convinced it's safe. The first bite came from a mid-level operator in Spain. He transferred funds into one of our decoy accounts, testing whether it was a secure channel. Within hours, a Hong Kong-based shell company followed, funneling larger amounts. Then came the move we'd been waiting for. A Cayman Islands holding company initiated a transfer that could only have been approved at the highest level. "Got you," I whispered, watching the trace unfold. Within minutes, the network's financial map lit up like a Christmas tree. The task force's big board showed transactions cascading through Singapore, Zurich, Panama, and back to the Caymans. For years, those routes had been invisible. Now, they were exposed. The coordinated operation that followed was something out of a movie. In the space of 48 hours, law enforcement teams executed raids in 12 countries. Europol froze accounts in Luxembourg. Australian Federal Police seized servers in Sydney. The FBI took down stateside fronts in Miami, Chicago, and Los Angeles. The numbers were staggering. 247 arrests across 47 countries. $127 million in assets recovered. A decade-old network dismantled in less than a week. When the dust settled, the FBI director himself called us in. "You two just changed the playbook," he told us. "This is going to be studied for years." Standing next to Grandpa, hearing that, I felt something I couldn't have imagined back on that porch in Sunset Grove. A deep, steady pride, not just in what we'd done, but in who we'd become. Back home, the impact was immediate. Mrs. Patterson expanded the Sterling Community Protection Program into a national nonprofit, hosting workshops in cities we'd never even visited. Sterling and Associates went from a neighborhood consulting firm to an international advisory service for law enforcement agencies. We trained investigators in Europe, led seminars in Australia, consulted on fraud prevention protocols in South America, and yet, through all of it, Grandpa kept his grounding. One evening, months after the takedown, we were sitting on the porch again. Same chairs, same angle of light, same hum of cicadas in the distance. "Hard to believe this all started because of one HOA president," I said. Grandpa smiled faintly. "Small storms can hide big hurricanes." We sat in companionable silence for a while. Then I asked the question I'd been holding back. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't fought back?" His expression didn't change, but his answer was quiet enough to make me lean in. "We wouldn't be here, and neither would a lot of the people we've saved." The phone on the porch table buzzed. Another encrypted alert. Grandpa glanced at it, then slid it face down without a word. "Work?" I asked. "Always," he said with that same calm I'd come to trust completely. "But nothing we can't handle." 5 years later, I stood in front of a class of FBI recruits, telling them the story from the beginning, not as a case file, but as a warning. Criminals target the vulnerable, I told them. But families protect each other. And sometimes, family isn't just who you're related to, it's who you choose to stand with when it matters. I didn't tell them everything, not the late-night fear, not the moments when I thought we were in over our heads, not the classified pieces that would never make it into any public record. Those parts belonged to us. What I did tell them was the truth that had carried us from a quiet porch in Sunset Grove to the largest elder fraud takedown in history. Never underestimate the quiet neighbor. Never mistake patience for weakness, and never, ever assume that an old man with a newspaper isn't watching everything. As the recruits filed out, a young agent stopped me. "Do you think I'll ever have a case like yours?" I smiled. "Maybe, but I hope you never have to wait for trouble to find you. Go find it first." That night, back at our office, Grandpa was reading in his chair. He looked up when I came in, eyes twinkling. "Long day?" "Long, but good," I said, dropping my bag. He nodded toward the corner where 2 go bags still sat, packed and ready. "You know," he said, "we've got room for one more case before the holidays." I laughed. "Always, sweetheart?" His grin widened. "Always." And just like that, I knew, whether it was another HOA dispute or the shadow of a global network, whether the fight lasted a week or another 5 years, we'd face it together. Because bullies don't stop when you give them what they want. They stop when you make sure they can't hurt anyone else ever again.